We, the people, have never been stronger. We, the people, have never been more openly expressive of what we believe. And we, the people, have never been more united. Right?
The answer to that is a little bit more complicated than yes or no. So let's start off with the basics. And to do that, we have to understand, what are the basics in this scenario? Well, why are we questioning how strong and united we, the people, are? It's because of politics. Republicans and Democrats alike are tearing at each other's throats. But before we get into that, let's talk about, what's the Republican Party? What's the Democrat Party? Where did they originate? Let's find out.
Well, the Republican Party, or also known as the Grand Old Party, GOP, was founded on March 20th, 1854. It was formed when the group decided they were opposing slavery and fought to gain rights for African Americans, hence the Civil War, a fight between the northern and southern states. According to PBS.org, on January 1st, 1863, President Lincoln issued the final Emancipation Proclamation. With it, he officially freed slaves within the states, or part of states, that were in rebellion and not in Union hands. This left 1 million slaves in Union territory that still were not freed. Throughout the North, African Americans and their white allies were riveting. They packed churches and meeting halls and celebrated the news. However, in the South, most slaves did not hear the proclamation for months. But now, the purpose of the Civil War changed. The North was not only fighting to conserve the Union, it was fighting to end slavery. And now that slavery was abolished, African Americans could finally join the military. According to the site archives.gov, they state that by the end of the Civil War, roughly 179,000 black men, 10% of the Union Army, served as soldiers in the U.S. Army, and another 19,000 served in the Navy. Unfortunately, nearly 40,000 black soldiers died over the course of the war, 30,000 of infection or disease. Because of the prejudice against them, black units were not in combat as extensively as they might have been, so only about 80 black officers were commissioned. Nevertheless, they served with distinction in a number of battles. By the end of the war, 16 black soldiers had been awarded the Medal of Honor for their heroism.
Later on, towards the Progressive and Great Depression era, the Republican Party was seen as the upper-class party, due to their association with business interests. Some Republicans even promoted social, economic, and labor reforms, including President Theodore Roosevelt. However, when the stock market crashed in 1929, the Great Depression, people blamed Republicans for this, which influenced the next election between Franklin D. Roosevelt, the Democrat nominee, and Herbert Hoover, the Republican nominee. After 1932, the Democrats had most of the majority for about the next 60 years, up until 1980. In between that, Republicans won 4 presidential elections and kept congressional majority for 4 years.
According to History.com, Republican Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was president from 1953 to 1961, actively supported equal rights for women and African Americans, which led to conservative Barry Goldwater's nomination as president in 1964 and continued with Richard Nixon's ill-fated presidency, then reached its climax with the election of Ronald Reagan in 1980. The South saw a major political change starting after World War II, as many white Southerners began to migrate to the GOP due to their opposition to big government, expanded labor unions, and democratic support for civil rights, as well as conservative Christians' opposition to abortion and other cultural war issues. Meanwhile, many black voters who remained loyal to the Republican Party since the Civil War began voting Democratic after the Great Depression and the New Deal. The website FiveThirtyEight states after the 1970s, Republicans started to become more conservative, as we can see today. Currently, they believe the federal government should not play a big role in people's lives. Most Republicans favor lower taxes and less government spending on social programs. They believe in less government intervention in business and economy. And the Republican Party is also centered on the idea that each person is responsible for their own place within society. that the government's role is to enable the people to secure the benefits of society for themselves, their families, and for those who are unable to do so. The government must practice economic responsibility and allow its people to keep the money that they work for. America should work to protect the nation's freedom first, while working to spread peace and human rights in the world.
Okay, so now that we know when the Republican Party originated, their history, and what they stand for, we can take that same information and establish that to the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party was established on January 8, 1828, making it the oldest party in the nation. It all started when James Madison and Thomas Jefferson had a disagreement with George Washington, John Adams, and Alexander Hamilton, who favorited a strong centralized government and a national banking system. Thomas and James preferred a decentralized, limited government, which formed an opposition faction known as the Democratic Republicans. Because of the danger that Washington saw in having two political parties, he addressed it in his farewell address. Afterwards, there was a power struggle between the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans.
In the presidential election of 1824, four Democratic-Republican candidates ran against each other. According to History.com, though Andrew Jackson won the popular vote and 99 electoral votes, the lack of electoral majority threw the election to the House of Representatives, which ended up giving the victory to John Quincy Adams. As a result, a senator from New York built an entirely new political party called the Democratic Party to back Jackson, who later went on in 1828 to beat John Adams. By the 1940s, Democrats had become a national party. From 1828 to 1856, the Democratic Party would win all but two presidential elections. Then in 1860, Democrats favored slavery, which Republicans denounced. This led to the Civil War we talked about earlier, which started in 1861 and ended in 1865. The Union victory would give the Republicans most of the dominance for the rest of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th. The Democratic Party still held on to the South, as most of the Southerners opposed the Republican measures protecting the rights of African Americans. And by the 1870s, Southern state legislators held back many of the Republican reforms. The Jim Crow law is one of the examples made by the Democratic Party that enforced segregation and suppressed black rights. 1969, presidential candidate William Jennings Bryan advocated for an expanded role of government, which ensured social justice. This idea influenced the Democratic Party forward. After the stock market crash, the Democrats held power for the next 60 years or so. However, Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal did not favor the South. The New Deal wanted expansion of labor unions, which Democrats disagreed with and slowly shifted to the Republican side, which opposed more government. There was also another shift in the Democratic Party in 1948, after President Truman, a Democrat, had announced a pro-civil rights platform. The shift in the party began when Southerners that had walked out of the convention became known as Dixiecrats, ran their own candidate for president. Strom Thurmond, who was a governor from South Carolina, had received more than 1 million votes from segregationist states that year. Though the split, most Dixiecrats went back to the Democratic Party. At the same time of the shift, black voters that had been loyal to the Republican Party began to vote Democratic, and would slowly grow into greater numbers of black voters. Even though Republican President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed the civil rights legislation, it would be Lyndon B. Johnson, a Democrat from Texas, that would sign the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 into law, which then later caused more and more Southerners to vote Republican. By 1992, the Democrats had caught the White House after losing 5 out of 6 elections previous. President Bill Clinton had taken over. Clinton's 8 years had seen the country through a period of economic prosperity, according to History.com. However, it was cut short by Clinton's impeachment, which was caused by a scandal between him and his intern Monica Lewinsky. As a result, the Senate acquitted him in 1999.
Okay, so we've established the main history of the Democratic Party, but now we have to establish what are their main beliefs. Well, currently there's 2 different stems in the Democratic Party. We have the progressive ideology and the liberal ideology. Some people would argue that they are the same, but it's not universally accepted.
Khan Academy states that progressive ideology believes it's the government's job to address past wrongs and reform systemic issues that cause those disadvantages in the first place, referring to discriminated groups. The liberal ideology is that the government should intervene in the economy and provide a broad range of social services to ensure well-being and equality across society. Liberals usually believe that the government should not regulate private, sexual, or social behaviors, and are said to fall on the left wing of the axis of political views. Britakana also states they believe in equality of opportunity and protection of individual rights, primarily to life, liberty, and property.
Huzzah! We now know what the Republicans and Democrats are. Now we can better understand the query, why are we questioning how strong and united we, the people, are? Well, earlier I said the answer to this was because of politics, the Republicans and Democrats. Well, this is true, but to understand that, we still have to understand why and what are they doing to each other and what caused the gap in the first place.
Let's take it back to 2008 when President Barack Obama was in the White House. He was the first African American and 44th president, and his vice president was Joe Biden, who is a current candidate for the Democrats in the 2020 election. According to ropercenter.cornell.edu, for the first term, 9% of Republicans voted for Obama, while 90% voted for McCain. And for Democrats, 89% voted for Obama, while 10% voted for McCain. In his second term, he received 303 electoral votes, while Mitt Romney received 206. During his 8 years of presidency, one of Obama's accomplishments was the Affordable Care Act, which was intended to give everyone affordable health care. This Affordable Care Act is what helped lead the Republicans to capturing the majority in the House of Representatives in the 2010 midterm elections. Even though Obama won the 2012 election, the Republican Party was able to retain their position in the House of Representatives, and Democratic majority in the Senate became very few.
In an interview I conducted with Congressman Pete Aguilar, who represents the 31st District of California, I asked him how he felt about Obama's administration and the impact it had on this country, to which he replied,
"To me, President Obama's most important achievement was passing the Affordable Care Act. The ACA drastically lowered the uninsured rate throughout the country, but especially in communities like ours in the Inland Empire. This meant that many people in our community had access to health care they needed for the first time. While I've always believed there are things we could do to improve the ACA, I've been proud to protect this key law from attacks by the current administration." Because of the dislike of the Affordable Care Act from the Republican Party, in October 1st through 16, 2013, the United States federal government entered a shutdown as Republicans in the House of Representatives attempted to delay or defund the Affordable Care Act. And as a result of this shutdown, approximately 800,000 federal employees were indefinitely furloughed and another 1.3 million were required to report to work without known payment dates.
Part of the reason Republicans don't like the ACA is because this individual mandate requires almost all Americans to have health insurance whether they can afford it or not. And if they choose not to accept this mandate, they receive a tax penalty, which not only angered the right, it moved them more conservative. Along with that, healthy people who managed to buy individual health insurance before the law's passage had seen their premiums and out-of-pocket costs soar, as insurances tried to raise prices to accommodate for sicker people who had been largely cut out of coverage. The people who were most affected were those who earned slightly too much to qualify for federal premium aid, particularly those who were early retirees in their 50s and 60s who were self-employed.
However, Republicans are not the only ones who did not like the ACA. Some liberals did not like it either. They believed it did not go far enough towards a fully government-run system and gives too much power to private insurance companies. On top of all that, some people found themselves in the coverage gap, after the Supreme Court in 2012 ruled that the ACA requirement for states to expand Medicaid had to be optional. That meant people with incomes under the poverty line, but still too high to qualify for Medicaid, and their states have no affordable program available. Others were forced to give up coverage they liked even if it did not offer many benefits. Some were angry because their doctors and hospitals were no longer in their insurance's network. During Obama's administration, marriage equality also came up. During Barack Obama's second term in office, courts began to counter efforts of conservatives, which were to outlaw same-sex marriage. In 2015, the Supreme Court ruled that the Defense of Marriage Act, DOMA, of 1996 was unconstitutional because it violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The U.S. Supreme Court case that held in a 5-4 decision that the fundamental right to marry is guaranteed to same-sex couples by both the Due Process Clause and the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. In 2014, the U.S. Department of Education ruled that schools receiving federal funds may not discriminate against transgender students, and a board within the Department of Health and Human Services decided that Medicare should cover sexual reassignment surgery. This decision is influential because private insurance companies often base their coverage on what Medicare considers appropriate and necessary forms of treatment for various conditions.
As you can see, there are a lot of reasons Republicans and Democrats drifted during the Obama era. However, let's talk about our new president, President Trump. In my investigation with our Congressman Pete Aguilar, I asked him how he felt about the Trump administration, to which he replied,
Since President Trump took office, we've seen an uptick in attacks on the most vulnerable members of our community. The president's policies have made life harder for immigrants and made healthcare more expensive and harder to access, and have given tax breaks to massive corporations while forcing middle-class families to foot the bill.
Now, he mentioned that Trump is making life harder for immigrants. By that, I'm assuming he's talking about the border wall that Trump is building. So, let's talk about it.
We're in the middle of a crisis on our southern border. The unprecedented surge of illegal migrants from Central America is harming both Mexico and the United States, and I believe the steps we will take, starting right now, will improve the safety in both of our countries. It's going to be very, very good for Mexico. A nation without borders is not a nation. Beginning today, the United States of America gets back control of its borders, gets back its borders. Thank you. I just signed 2 executive orders that will save thousands of lives, millions of jobs, and billions of dollars. These 2 orders are part of an immigration reform we outlined during the campaign. I want to emphasize that we will be working in partnership with our friends in Mexico to improve safety and economic opportunity on both sides of the border. I have deep admiration for the people of Mexico, and I greatly look forward to meeting again with the President of Mexico. We'll be doing that shortly. We will discuss close coordination on many important issues between our countries. This coordination includes the dismantling of cartels and keeping illegal weapons and cash from flowing out of America and into Mexico, out of our country, out of the United States, and it goes right into Mexico. They have to stop it. We have to stop it. We are going to save lives on both sides of the border. And we also understand that a strong and healthy economy in Mexico is very good for the United States. Very, very good. We want that to happen. By working together on a positive trade, safe borders, and economic cooperation, I truly believe we can enhance the relation between our 2 nations to a degree not seen before, certainly in a very, very long time. I think our relationship with Mexico is going to get better. Here's a brief summary of what actions are contained in my executive orders. The Secretary of Homeland Security, working with myself and my staff, will begin immediate construction of a border wall.
In summary, President Trump is saying that the United States needs to take back control of its borders again, as many illegal immigrants are crossing over and flooding Mexico with illegal drugs and weapons. The key term here is illegal, as many people have a current misunderstanding of what President Trump has said. Trump does not want to deport all Mexicans. He wants to deport the people who should not be here without a legal right and are doing illegal activities. In doing this, he will save the U.S. billions of dollars, save millions of lives on both sides of the border, improve economic opportunity, and better the relationship between Mexico and the U.S. In fact, it would make lives easier on immigrants who want to wait to come into the U.S. legally.
Now, almost all Republicans agree with President Trump, as he has a 94% approval rating. But when looked into the Democratic approval rating, we see a 10 to 7%. So why don't Democrats agree with President Trump, especially when they used to agree on the border wall?
We are offered 4 reasons as to why that might be. The first one is the media sways its audience with an emotional appeal to deceive them and say that President Trump wants to deport all Mexicans and display pictures of children in cages, President Trump standing over crying children, and spreading general lies. However, the picture that the media shares of children in cages is actually from the Obama era. Those pictures were taken in 2014. And the crying children that the New York Times depicts Trump standing over wasn't crying because she was separated from her mother at the border. In fact, she wasn't separated at all. The mother and the daughter were taken away together. Another reason is that people feel differently about a wall than a fence. The third reason could be the border wall has become a symbol, and to some, the symbol may be the attitudes towards immigrants and racial minorities. As political scientists may put it, the wall has become racialized. And the last reason may be people who oppose the wall may just oppose it because of their opposition to President Trump. The most recent and last event I will go over is the impeachment trials that went on. If you did not know or did not hear the news, President Trump was acquitted from his charges after the impeachment articles reached the Senate. In my interview with Pete Aguilar, when asked, "What do you think about the impeachment crimes against the president?" his reply was, "I believe there is sufficient evidence to indicate that the president is guilty of both articles of impeachment filed against him. The president attempted to use his office for his own political gain and then attempted to cover up his wrongdoing after he was caught." Why do you believe he should or should not get impeached? The House voted to impeach President Trump in December of 2019. I supported both articles of impeachment against the president because under our Constitution, no one is above the law. The 2 articles he is referring to are abuse of power and obstruction of Congress, along with high crimes and misdemeanors, which the House of Representatives voted to impeach on December 18, 2019. The first article that got passed was the abuse of power, which had 230 yeas and 197 nays. Article 2 was obstruction of Congress, which had 229 yeas and 198 nays. In both articles, all Republicans voted nay, while only 3 Democrats agreed. In fact, Representative Jeff Van Drew of New Jersey even said he will switch parties to become a Republican. The main reasons Republicans disagree with any of the impeachment articles was because they believe that it was politically motivated in favor of Democrats to win the next election this 2020. Along with that, there was no real evidence that the president had done anything wrong. As a result, when the articles got sent to the Senate, President Trump was acquitted of his accusations. Now, before I finish off the video and leave you on your journey to the political world, I want to show you what I mean by violence.
Last time I saw you, you got kicked off a fucking match. What's that for? Huh? Oh, you know, the exact same thing we're gonna use it for. How about you just get fucking go. Hey, get the fuck out. Let's go. Get the fuck out. Hey, you touch me. fucking touch me. Now you want to go? Back up. Come on, back the fuck up.
Get on your anybody or just walk out or what?
We're doing like 2 runs.
So you literally didn't say anything to her.
Oh! 1:30 here, I say that. That's not fair. That's not, if you track that, Haley, that's not fair.
To say how they will be different than Barack Obama, how they will get African Americans out of this vicious cycle where you're in a family school and one part of America, African Americans are in
Arguments quickly escalated into fistfights.
I'm blinded over here.
Police officers stepped in to break it up.
I'm blinded over here. Does anybody have anything?
Throughout Civic Center Park between Trump supporters
I can't see
demonstrators. About
This is why we are questioning how strong and united we the people are. This is what happens when people nowadays have a different opinion. Let's change that. Let's become the United States again. Let's go back to being one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
There you have it. We went over the Republicans and Democrats, their history, what they stand for, what they believe in, and we also talked about the Obama era. On top of that, we talked about current events, the divide between our country, and President Trump. So why was all of this important? Well, in a poll I conducted with students around my age, I found that 41% of students are not interested in politics, and then another 64 don't even keep up with it. This means that students aren't getting ready to be involved in the real world. So by watching this video, I hope that many of you can get a basic understanding of politics, because some students get their political views from their parents and or friends, which makes them develop a certain kind of hate towards a political group without knowing any facts.